डिस्प्ले ऐसे करते हैं।
उधर वो हो गया ना, मिजान वगैरह हो गए, उनको बोले टेबल लगाना।
लाइट कम करना, बहुत लाइट लाइट जा रहा है, लाइट कम करना। अरे वो बगल कैमरा नहीं जा रहा है। हाँ वही चल रहा है, वही चल रहा है। हल्का लाइट दो। अभी ये सब है, ये सब है, ये सब है। बात बात ठीक है, बात बात चला ना।
ये बेल तो नहीं दूंगा आपको, बेल जो आ रहा है वो तो नहीं दूंगा, बेल जो बज रहा है वो तो नहीं दूंगा
ना ना, अभी मेरा नहीं जा रहा है।
देख कौन सा
बेल
नहीं नहीं नहीं, चालू हो जाएगा ना। हाँ मैं कर दूँगा, उनको बोल देना कैमरा ऑन कर लेगा।
to host a session on empowering policymakers and diplomats with literacy for tech-informed foreign and international digital policy. My name is Sebastian Blum. I work with the Data Innovation Lab, an initiative by the German Federal Foreign Office, as a program manager. And just shortly about the Data Innovation Lab, we try to advance tech-informed foreign policy. We might talk a little bit about what we actually understand with that. By creative data and AI solutions. And we understand tech diplomacy as a structured approach to navigate geopolitical implications of new technologies by building coalitions and enabling informed and strategic diplomatic responses. Why is this crucial? I think we can all agree that we're witnessing how the rapid technology development we're witnessing right now, such as artificial intelligence, but also different technologies, are reshaping global power dynamics. And sometimes what we perceive also in our work is that the technological change outpaces the political consensus. So digital governance has become a core pillar of bilateral, multilateral, and international engagement. Yet we also think, since many policymakers and diplomats are quite aware of the stakes, they sometimes not only lacking the tools or lack the knowledge of how to use the rules to anticipate these specific challenges we're talking about and shape policies, specifically digital policy, international digital policy, proactively. So to bridge this gap, there's a bunch of methodology, futures literacy methodology, about what we're going to talk a little bit more today. And we think that these methods can actually help to navigate a little bit through this complexity and to identify more governance options, or we call it like policy spaces. And this is specifically what we want to talk a little bit about today. How we actually thought about doing this is that we have some perspectives from the German administration and two perspectives from two leading Indian think tanks that will also participate in the discussion, that focus also a little bit more on social empowerment and human centricity in their approaches. So our participants will discuss why futures literacy is not only nice to have soft skill, but also mandatory skill that has to be more implemented in the training and the everyday work by policymakers and diplomats. So this is what we're trying to discuss today a little bit more, that we think about how we come from a more reactive stance in making international digital policy to more proactive approaches. And this is specifically what we want to talk a little bit about today. So to set the stage, I would like to invite my colleague Lars Ratscheid to look a little bit more on how to anticipate these global shifts we were talking a little bit about today, from today's perspective, and how these ideas of futures literacy and how you can affect the future and influence by decisions today a little bit more, how they manage in practice. And to kickstart the session now, Lars will give a short introduction showcasing 4 scenarios. He works at the Secretariat of the Indo-German Digital Dialogue, where he supports the dialogue in its stakeholder engagement. The Indo-German Dialogue is a multi-stakeholder platform to advance joint efforts of India and Germany in its digital transformation journeys. It has been set up by the German Federal Ministry for Digital Transformation and Government Modernization, implemented by the GSZ, in partnership with India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Shortly on Lars' biography, he has worked on multilateral processes in digital governance and supported the growth of IT-based startups and established IT companies. And now I'm happy to invite you to provide a short introduction to futures literacy and showcasing 4 scenarios how to amplify the impact of today's policy making of futures literacy. Stage is yours.
Cool. Thank you, Sebastian. And thank you also for our co-panelists. I will take just a bit of time now
to emphasize why we need to think about futures and what futures literacy can be. And I think Sebastian already mentioned it. The world has changed a little bit in recent years, and what I feel personally is that everything has become more urgent and everything is a priority. And we deal often with crises rather than thinking about what our visions is or what futures can be. So I think futures literacy and looking at scenarios can be quite important, because we should not forget about our futures, and with that we should also not forget about the realm of digital and the influence digital has on everyday lives now. And to do so, many organizations apply foresight methods. Foresight is really a set of methods to constructively think about the future, to reduce uncertainty, and ultimately become more resilient. And while thinking about futures, we obviously cannot fully avoid surprises. The world is complex and uncertain, but we can try to anticipate trends and disruptions and also leverage our capacity for change. And it's also not about thinking, okay, what precisely will the future be, but to be prepared for alternative futures. This is why we also think about futures in plural and not a singular one. And to visualize that, I have brought along 4 ready-made scenarios for the digital governance of 2035, so in roughly 10 years. And maybe one word on them, they are quite extreme, they are quite exaggerated, but they are plausible. And they enable us to think about, okay, what policy spaces are there in place that Sebastian already mentioned. But the real future will be somewhere in between. It will be a mix of all 4 of them, or completely other ones. Because the ones I prepared, they may provide a basis for discussion, but they are just an example. So also they don't hold any official views, but rather I've used a couple of external sources from the Economist, the OECD, and some other platforms. Yeah. And with that, I would say let's just jump right into the first scenario on competing blocks. It's really a continuation of recent developments, and by 2035, tech will be woven into daily routines. Weakly regulated AI models are everywhere in bureaucracy, health, finance, communication, and learning. Services work because AI work. And access to public services, however, requires a state-backed digital identity. I think here in India we are quite aware of that. In other parts of the world we are working on that. It speeds transactions, but it's also a bit challenging for people who cannot or choose not to enroll. The market really favors large firms. As platforms concentrate control, they begin to set roles. High barriers to entry sideline smaller players, so SMEs, and also emerging economies. Capabilities only advance incremental when it comes to AI. There are still persistent errors in complex tasks, and investor enthusiasm cools after repeated overpromise. Access to digital technology widens, but unevenly. So digital divides that we already see today become deeper. And activists and NGOs might build parallel networks, they document harm, advocate for those who are excluded, but have only limited reach. And digital governance is still negotiated globally, but the enforcement can be rather weak and practice diverges from rhetoric. So summing up with the first scenario, everyday life runs on weakly regulated AI, access widens unevenly, innovation plateaus, and public opinion stays ambivalent. So much on that. And then a second one. The second scenario really describes the erosion of the status quo. So bear with me on that. So by 2035, digital stack powers daily life. Productivity rises, but so does unemployment. And reliability has slipped, and confidence in technologies, in AI, erodes due to cyber attacks and disinformation. So this also leads to transactions being done analog again and in person. Paper receipts, face-to-face validation, physical keys. It's not about nostalgia, but it's really about risk management. And then geopolitical tensions also intensify. Global cooperation fades, cross-border data flows are limited, that also limit the use of AI. And while digital solutions solve problems, they also create new ones. So for example, we have satellite collisions that threaten the infrastructure, and the extraction of minerals accelerates biodiversity loss. Privacy, free expression, and access to information steadily decay, civic space erodes, NGOs and activists only have minimal reach. Grassroots movements attempt to provide more digital rights, but community-driven alternatives lack regional and global reach or stability. So again, summing up, digital tech is everywhere, but unreliable, automation cuts jobs, online spaces are flooded with hacks and fakes, and people use analog methods for sensitive items. Scenario 3, this is really about discipline and about quite a lot of regulation. So we have very, very strict guardrails by governments in place in 2025. The civil society rebalances power, curbing dominant platform, and the aim is to be really pragmatic, to protect society and keep innovation purposeful. Something is not working anymore. Yeah. So we have stable, reliable digital services, but access is gated, and only few government-aligned firms dominate data, compute, and talent. And we have very highly capable AI models with narrow focus that boost productivity and reduce human oversight. Unemployment is still rising, and it leads to a public backlash. With all this inclusion, all the regulation, also grey markets are bred. The cheaper, less safe AI spread, and cybercrime actually rises. The digital governance shifts to treaties and alliances with security as a glue. Transparency, accountability, and safety are decisive for any kind of regulation. And then, again, summing up, by 2035, a security-first, state-regulated digital order runs on certified platforms and strict licensing. Narrow but powerful AI boosts productivity, IDs, data localization, and traceability are global norms, rights are reframed collectively, and privacy is traded against state security. Coming to the fourth scenario, this might be the most different one, and it's all about reclaiming the commons. So there we emerge from crisis into civic momentum. Communities actually lead digital developments as well as digital policy. Digital tech becomes a tool for sustainability, participation deepens, and productivity rises, poverty falls. Here, states provide, again, clear guardrails, but the norms and all of the rules and regulations are really co-shaped by companies, communities, and the civil society. We also have strong competition authorities to keep markets open, so innovation and healthy digital ecosystems can thrive. SMEs also are part of the digital economy. So the centralized monopolies give way for decentralized community-owned networks, co-ops, and digital commons flourish. Big tech shifts from pure profit to partnership. And then technological entry barriers also fall. We have a lot of open digital infrastructure based on open source. This leads to low-cost, high-quality open source AI solutions that empower, again, SMEs, individuals, as well as governance institutions. Digital governance is really co-created. We have companies, civil society, academia, and engineers design rules anchored in human rights. So summing up, by 2035, civic power really reshapes digital life. Governments supply guardrails while multi-stakeholder bodies enforce digital rights. Decentralized community-owned networks and open digital infrastructure empower SMEs, services, and public institutions. Sectoral AI lifts productivity and quality of life with human-centered oversight, preventing harms and sustaining trust. All right, and I really hope this again, all of these different scenarios highlighted that there are different futures, that we can think differently, but that really decisions we make today already decide where we will go, or which of these futures we may favor or may not. And with that, back to you.
So sorry for the short break. Thank you so much for sharing this scenario of love. I think it visualized very well what is at stake, and again, I saw a variety of reactions on it in the panel, so it is provocative in a way, but like Lars said, I think it's really a good way to start how to anticipate better. And what we're doing right now is going over to our other panelists, sharing their perspectives on how they anticipate the discussed challenges already. I'm starting with my colleague from the German Federal Foreign Office, Raphael Leuner, who works at the Data and AI Lab of the Ministry. Raphael is a data scientist and senior AI expert at the German FFO, where he's responsible for leveraging AI in support of international administration as well as multilateral cooperation and negotiation. Your portfolio spans from developing great prototypes to rolling out the applications to the ministry and its users, and you're also advising on current trends in AI development. Since your team is really one of the engine of digital transformations within the administration that bridges the gap somehow between technology and, in our case, diplomatic work. My first question to you would be, from your experience working from the lab, what are the most critical literacy gaps you perceive you encounter with our colleagues when you introduce them to data and AI-driven tools? And do you think that your or our work empowers them a little bit how to move beyond a rather reactive approach? What would you say?
Thanks, Sebastian. So I think when we talk about digital literacy, data literacy, AI literacy, we usually have two ideas in mind of why we want to do this with our colleagues. One is, of course, we want them to use these technologies and to leverage them because we think they're really transformational in the way that we work, that all of us work. But also, of course, they are an important topic that our colleagues all around the world are talking about, and it comes up in basically every discussion they are having. So we want them to have an understanding about the technology, about their capabilities. And I think for some time those two have been viewed as rather separate from each other. One more an IT topic, right? Just roll out the tools that they need and then make them use them. And the other one more is a political topic maybe. But I think, from our experience, those two are going very close together, or they need to go very closely together, because I think just using tools without understanding the wider repercussions they may have, the kind of even history or stories that are associated with the technology can lead to some risk. On the other side, just talking about technology without having used them and our colleagues having made their own experiences, I think also doesn't work. And I think the most important thing, especially when it comes to AI right now, is we try to make our colleagues curious about it and about trying it out in a safe and responsible way, but really, trying to get some creativity out of them, of what they can do with it. Because, again, going back to the past, I think the way they were introduced to tools was usually they had a very, very detailed instruction manual that told them where to click for each step, where to click. That's what you have to do. And I think we all know that doesn't work with AI. AI requires us to really explore and to try things out ourselves, see it work, but also see it fail a lot of times, to get to get an experience of what's possible and what's not possible. And I think both of that is important. And the way we do that is not by telling them in extensive presentations, but by making them curious and trying to get them to explore it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think what you also very well described is like that this is some like huge organizational change that we're perceiving. I mean, there's of course we talk a lot about how organizations change, but you can see how directly affected even our colleagues inside such an organization like a ministry are affected by these changes, and really have to explain in some kind of broader narrative and story how to actually engage with that part. And on a broader perspective, this also brings me to our next point, that futures literacy, regarding also the scenarios that Lars described a little bit, has to be really founded in some more kind of inclusive, diverse aspects of societal impact as well. And to a certain degree, they're also reflected in what's going on in an institution like a ministry, in a way, even though this, of course, sometimes it's rather like smaller frame. Anyways, this also brings me to my next guest, Afsar Kapoor from the APTI Institute. Nice to have you here as well. The APTI Institute is a leading research institution that is dedicated to bridge the gap between technology and society, and you have done intensive work of specifically data stewardship and reimagining how data can be gathered in the public interest, particularly in global majority countries also. After is the co-founder of the APTI Institute, and you have 15 years of public policy and strategy consulting experience with a focus on use of technology for welfare. You work on participative governance of data, digital public infrastructure, and you were a member of the World Economic Forum on data equity. So from your perspective, how can we ensure that the more societal aspects of futures literacy really get into these kind of decision-making process from like institutions that are rather closed, so that it doesn't remain a tool for elite decision-making, but actually incorporating different economic and social realities to build more equitable AI policies?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that question. I think from the perspective of our work, what we've been doing as an organization is trying to work with policymakers globally to help them understand the value of data. Because I think that what a lot of governments, particularly outside the capitals, like as we go away from that, don't necessarily understand is, how can governments extract value from this data to make better policy decisions. There's a lot of questions around the government data is siloed, it is not usable, sometimes there's like over collection, sometimes there's under collection. And I think that for even reasonable futures thinking, the data sets which exist in government in abundance are not necessarily being useful for those even within the government. And anybody, particularly in the context of India, has been to a government office, you realize that there'll be a dashboard, and that dashboard has gaps, there's quality issues. Sometimes I've heard of stories that data is being collected in the field, but then you have to go to the ministry, it's not being used. So how do we, I think, build these pipelines has been a core of what we do, and not just from the function of the government in the offices that we see, but also all the frontline workers, which I think should be, I know this is about policymakers and diplomats, but given the way that the quote-unquote digital policy ecosystems are evolving, I think we need to broaden that much more to include people like frontline workers who are health workers, nutrition workers, teachers. They have all become data generators and data labelers, and they do a lot of work because so much of the government is now being digitalized. So how do we also get them to be part of these futures literacy ecosystem, to understand that there is value in the work that they're doing? So because we may get a lot of questions to me like, I have to register, then I have to fill in an application, what is there for me? So how do we sort of get them to be aligned to to the fact that there's an incentive to collect this data to help them see all the different futures. And I really obviously enjoyed your scenario 4, which is that co-design needs to be embedded right now so that we can get to scenario 4, right? Which is obviously seeming utopic right now. But if we do the futures, which is if we align incentives, if we communicate value from the bottom all the way up, then I think that there is something to be said about that co-design commons-led approach, which I think is a space that we should all strive towards, even if we sort of like meander off in the middle, but I think that's where we should be heading. And I think co-design is a really, really critical part of that.
Thank you so much. And now I will hand over to Dr. Umashi Aneya, who is the founder and director of the Digital Future Lab, to rounding out our panel for the first round of interventions. You're a political scientist and policy leader focused on building accountable and inclusive AI governance. She's also, like I already said, the founder and director of the Digital Futures Lab, a research and foresight studio that builds empirical evidence, shapes political narratives, and designs governance and policy frameworks to ensure emerging technology serves the public interest. Ubashi, your work also serves as a critical reminder that technology is never neutral, and we already touched a little bit upon that. And so, as I understood, like preparing a little bit, that the Futures Lab is really dedicated to redirect these innovation trajectories to more equitable and sustainable digital future. So something that Lars has also already mentioned in his scenarios. So my question for you would be, well, a lot of like many national AI strategies, for example, focus exclusively on more economic models like GDP growth and compute power is all the talk right now, especially on the AI summit. How does future literacy help us anticipate social friction and impact on human agency that these kind of approaches sometimes miss?
Thanks, Sebastian, and thanks for having me on this panel. We've been doing this foresight work for nearly a decade now, and I feel like we've been kind of shouting at the margins, saying like, hey, it's really important to build foresight into policymaking practice, and often this falls on deaf ears. COVID was a bit of a turning point in that regard, where I think it became much more widely acknowledged that foresight is important in the field of policymaking. So all that to say, I really appreciate and welcome the work that you all are doing in this space, and thank you for having a discussion at this summit on the importance of foresight. I think let me try and outline maybe 3 or 4 key ways in which I think futures literacy can help unpack or identify the social frictions that you talked about. One of the things that foresight work does really well, I think, is shows us the early signs of change, which are not yet quantifiable, which are not yet metricizable, and so therefore may not make its way into an economic model, right? Because you can't count it. So to give you an example, some of the impacts that we now see that the AI industry is having on climate, right? This conversation is not new. It's been happening for nearly a decade, but it was really at the margins, right? It was in the kind of periphery. We saw these early signs of change. Had we paid attention to these early signs of change, then we may not have been where we are today, where we're now like, oh, we built these massive infrastructure, that we're on this, on this course of building bigger and bigger infrastructure. So what do we do about the climate question? I think the second thing that futures literacy does very well is that it helps us systematically think about the second and third order consequences of action that we might take today, including some of the unintended consequences. So, we can assume that everyone has the same intentions, and we can assume that for a second, like we hold that thought, that everyone has the best intentions, and we're designing technology in the public interest, etc. But very often, that will have a second order implication in terms of a structural impact, or a second order implication in a sector that is completely different, or a whole set of unintended consequences. And so futures literacy allows us to kind of anticipate that early on, and to avoid the kind of harmful policy and technology lock-in where we find ourselves today, I think, when you look at a lot of what is happening in the AI space. I think the third thing that futures literacy can do in terms of unpacking the social friction, either it opens up the conversation conversation about policy to a non-expert audience. Very often, I think folks who don't work in the space of policy feel that, yeah, I cannot enter this space. There's too much jargon. There's a lot of technical language. I'm just not qualified to talk in this space. But actually, what future literacy does is that it puts real value on people's lived experience, people's lived experience of technology, people's lived experience of what the infrastructure around them means for them, and allows them to participate in this space. And I think by doing that, by giving this space for people's lived experience to be elevated to a public policy conversation, we again find those spaces, we get insight into where that social friction might be, right? Which we may not otherwise if we use kind of only top-down or very economist kind of model. And maybe a fourth one, and I'll stop there, is that, zooming out a little bit, when you look at the way economists approach the world, there's an assumption that we're all rational beings, that we are all, that we make rational decisions about costs and benefits, and that we are all, we all trying to maximize our own self-gain and maximize self profit, and it's a very individualistic view of the world. But in reality, I think we know that we're not rational beings. What rationality means is socially constructed. It looks very different depending if you're sitting in New Delhi, if you're sitting in London. And people optimize for many other things aside from self-gain, right? And so I think future literacy allows us in some sense to bring these different worldviews, bring these different kind of assumptions, bring this cultural nuance, this cultural context into public policy conversation. So I think it's a really, really important tool, and I would be delighted to see many, many more government initiatives actually incorporating future literacy into their kind of public policy.
Thank you so much, and I think this really is also rounding up again where we initially thought about the session, because specifically when we see about topics about digital governance, digital transformation in our respective institutions, even then I feel like this more effective approach how to perceive these developments really helps also to build a bridge, for example, to what Raphael said, that you somehow have to connect what you're basically working on with the technology, but to make them more open towards the people working in your respective units and institutions. So right now, of course, I do have some follow-up questions for you, but I would also give the floor to the audience and also for you if you want to react to your respective comments a little bit. So the floor is yours if I have any questions from the audience. Maybe you have another micro, and if not, I can also walk around. That would be nice. And maybe it would be great if you introduce yourself shortly and ask a question then.
Hi, I'm Sriram. I'm doing my studies in international relations at Ashoka University, just a few kilometers from here. My question about taking from foreign and international policy. I hate to put all of you on the spot here, but I think just yesterday the Wall Street Journal reported that in the operation that it was like the continuous operation in Venezuela, the Trump administration had consulted Claude for its decision making. So I wanted to know your thoughts on when we're looking at sort of the future literacy for policymakers. Do you think that it's more of a top-down approach that we're taking, or are we looking at a more sort of bottom-up approach, or like a more corporate side-ish approach that really puts AI at the heart of foreign policy decision making?
Maybe I can start. I can't really comment on like individual use of what AI technologies governments consult with, but of course you're right that AI right now is in this crazy development where people think that it's going to be like a winner-takes-all economy, and that's why people are betting crazy amounts of money on these labs and spending incredible amounts of money, which of course means that like most countries in the world can't even compete with the amounts that, for example, Anthropic, the makers of Claude, can spend on AI development. And that is one of the key issues to tackle. I think that's going to be one of the themes of the summit, at least from a lot of the sessions I have seen, is to look at what we can do about this, right? How can AI be developed by more than 3 or 4 big corporations in the world? I don't think there's an easy answer to that, to be honest, because it is incredibly heavy on compute, on data. All of that costs so much money. But yeah, I do think that is a challenge for policymakers all around the world to tackle. I think there are some approaches that have been put forward. We have seen some very impressive open source initiatives. I hope, and we're building on a lot of open source technologies as well. I hope that these become even more successful than they are.
Okay, I see there's many other questions.
Yeah, I have a...
Sure, yes, okay, go for it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Hi, I'm Neha Dwivedi and I'm from International Institute of Hotel Management. Quite a few students of IHM have come with me. Can you all please raise your hands? Yeah. So we all together have a question. So when it comes to future literacy, what it actually means for diplomats and policymakers, like is it about anticipating risk or understanding technologies, or it is something really deeper? And what is the blind spot is there? Which blind spot you feel is still there when it comes to emerging technology in decision making?
Future literacy is, it can help policymakers anticipate risk, yes. It can help policymakers join the dots on many different kinds of social phenomena, while still might be in an emergent state. We don't know what they need yet in their path. But it can also help policymakers think about what are the alternative futures that they might want, or what are the kind of alternative trajectories that we might pursue that are different from where we are today. So in some sense, it therefore helps policymakers avoid a kind of deterministic view of how our society is going to unfold, and gives them space to also exert their agency in steering the path of steering innovation trajectory. I think that was the first part of your question.
Questions from the panel, maybe from you, Rafael? Okay, then. You?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Osman. I'm also with GICAT and the Indo-German Digital Dialogue. My question goes to Aftab because I just had a little bit of a deja vu when you mentioned, we're still having silos, there's so much data, it's not working together. And not that I want to support any of his views or whatever, but in 2011, 2012, I remember Peter Steele, when we had those moving trials where we had the same comment, he was like shocked by the amount of data that had to be gathered for the observations and analytics. And I find it interesting